I want to move into another topic. This topic that I want to move into now is called polar equations. This is for my pre-calculus students. Let's just take a look at a couple things that will help you be able to convert polar equations to rectangular equations. So the first thing I want you to see is a lot of these identities are going to come from a basic triangle. All right, so the way you're going to get this x, let's call this r here, the way you're going to get this x is to be able to see that the relationship cosine of theta, the cosine of theta, in other words, let's say you have cosine of theta is equal to x over r, all right? So they get this identity from just multiplying r on both sides. X is equal to r cosine theta, all right? And this is the same thing here. The sine of theta, all right, let's put it over here. The sine of theta is equal to y over r, okay? And if you multiply by r on both sides, you'll get that, okay? You'll get that. Y is equal to r sine theta. Also, notice here, I hope you can read that, x squared plus y squared is equal to r squared. That's true too, based on the Pythagorean theorem. All right, so I don't want you to commit this stuff to memory. This stuff should make sense. I tell my students, hey, math is, hey, if you have to remember a lot of things, math becomes very difficult. But based on what you've learned in the past, classes you've learned in the past, if you can relate things that you've learned in the past with a current problem, math becomes much easier, much simpler, because it makes sense rather than you committing a lot of things. So all of that said, we want you to convert this rectangular equation into a polar equation. We want you to convert this into a polar equation. And what that means is that we want you to rewrite x and y so that the equation is no longer in terms of x and y, it's in terms of r and theta. R and theta. All right? So let's try to do that. So now all you're going to do is replace this x with r cosine theta. It's not very difficult at all. So we have 3, replace this x with r cosine theta, minus y, replace this y with r sine theta. And then you have the plus 2, bring that down, plus 2 is 0. Notice how what we've done is at first the equation that we had was written in terms of x and y only. But now we've replaced the x and y with polar coordinates. All right, so now what we have is we have 3 r cosine theta minus r sine theta is, let's just say, equal to -2. Let's bring that plus 2 over. All right, so now that we're basically done, let's just put it in a form that you might see it in a textbook. Let's pull out the r. If we pull out the r, we have 3 cosine theta minus sine theta, and that's equal to -2. Last step in solving for r would be to divide all of this on both sides. Divide 3 cosine theta minus sine theta over here, and divide 3 cosine theta minus sine theta over here, and then that would end up being your final answer. Your final answer would be -2 over 3 cosine theta minus sine theta. And like I say, that's our final answer there. You've just converted a rectangular equation that you're probably more familiar with. You're more familiar with this than this, but this statement is the same as this. It's just that this is in a different, it's a different way of writing an equation. It's called a polar equation. 3x minus y plus 2 is equal to 0 is how you'd say that in using rectangular coordinates. All right, that's a rectangular equation. But the same equation can be stated, r is equal to -2 over 3 cosine theta minus sine theta. It's the same statement. All right, so now that said, let's do a different kind of problem. Let's try to convert polar equations into rectangular equations. All right, so what you got to be able to see here is that we got r is equal to 4 cosine theta. 4 cosine theta. We told you already We told you already there's another way you can write cosine theta. Another way you can write cosine theta is you can write cosine theta, that's equal to x over r. Cosine theta is equal to x over r. So you can replace that cosine theta with x over r. So we have r is equal to 4 times cosine theta, which is x over r. All right. So now what you could do is you could multiply both sides by r. If you multiply both sides by r, it would get this r out of the denominator. All right, let's give us a little bit more space. You get r squared is equal to 4x, because this r would go away. You'd multiply this side by r, cancels that r. You multiply this side by r, you get r squared. And now what you got to be able to see here is that r squared, we told you that r squared is equal to x squared plus y squared. All right, so now r squared, that's x squared plus y squared is equal to 4x. This is a rectangular equation that's equivalent to this polar equation. So that's the final answer. You could manipulate this a little bit. You can maneuver this a little bit. You know, a textbook might say x squared minus 4x plus y squared is 0. But basically, you know, you're done. Basically, you're done. All right. So let's look at another problem. This is a polar equation. You got r, you got theta. We want you to change that so that you don't have theta, you don't have r, you have x. All right. So to turn this into a rectangular equation, what you should do, all right, so you had here you start with tangent theta is equal to y over x. Tangent theta is equal to y over x, but they give you that theta is pi over 6. Theta is pi over 6. So you can substitute. You got tangent pi over 6 is equal to y over x. All right. So tangent of pi over 6 is something that you should know. If you're watching this and you're following me, you should be able to go to the special triangle. All right. You know that if you got a 30, 60, 90 triangle, all right, you got a 30, 60, 90 triangle, you know that the ratios are radical 3, 1 to 2. Well, it's 30. That pi over 6 is the same thing as 30 in degrees. So the tangent of 30 is the opposite over the adjacent. Wow, you can't see what I'm doing. Forgive me. The tangent of 30 is the opposite over the adjacent. So the tangent of 30, the tangent of pi over 6 is 1 over radical 3 is equal to y over x. Now what you have is you've got an equation. Wow, I'm so sorry. Now you've got an equation that is written in terms of x and y. So basically that's the final answer. You could cross multiply here if you like. Get radical 3y is x. All right, but basically that's the final answer. There are things that you could do with that to simplify it more, but I don't want to spend time doing it right now. Final answer right there. All right, I think we only have time for one. We'll try to get 2 more problems in. We do have enough time to do this one because this one is very, very simple. All right, so r, you could square both sides on this one. You got r squared is 4. We'll come back to this problem next week. If you square both sides, you get r squared is 16. You square both sides, you get r squared is 16. R squared, we told you earlier, was x squared plus y squared, and you get 16. So that one's very easy. Final answer, x squared plus y squared is 16. God bless you. Never quit, never give up. You always put forth your best effort, and you will dominate math. God bless you.